Hi. I want to talk about something pretty heavy today. And in order to do that, I have to start on a personal level and then move outward from there. Then I'm going to end the video on a personal note. What I want to talk about today is how to deal with the inevitable suffering that will be bestowed upon you by life, the universe, karma, the cosmos, God, whatever you want to call it. So starting on the personal level, I'm in my mid-30s and I was having some wisdom tooth pain. This happens around October and November when the seasons change. Apparently that's a normal thing with the barometric levels and stuff like that. And it usually lasts a few days and goes away, but on the third day, I lost feeling in my tongue. The next day I woke up and the pain was still there in my jaw. I'd lost feeling in my tongue. I was having trouble opening my mouth and I was having trouble closing my right eye. And by the time I got to work, I could hardly use the right side of my face at all. I couldn't blink. I couldn't move my mouth. Nothing. And if you kind of look at my nose, it's kind of a little off center. So I scheduled an appointment with the dentist, went in. You know, there's a chance that there's a nerve right here that your wisdom tooth kind of digs into it and it has a ripple effect on the nerves in your face and everything goes numb. And the dentist suggested, well, hey, you got to get to the ER and get an antibiotic injection because the amoxicillin we can give you isn't going to be fast enough. So you got to do something a little bit more extreme. I went to the ER after like 5 minutes of talking and the doctor was a little skeptical. He kind of investigated and put his hands here and had me do a few like neurological things. He said, I don't think you have a wisdom tooth related issue. I think this is Bell's palsy. And I was very skeptical of that. I know that he's a doctor and I know that he knows more than me, but you know, once in a while there is a misdiagnosis. And he said, hey, I'll put your mind at ease. Let's get you a CT scan. Let's prove that there's no indication of that. I can't wait to see my bill for all this. Sure enough, all signs point to Bell's palsy. It's a viral infection that most likely comes from like a middle ear infection that rides the nerves and inflammation kind of pushes on it and everything kind of goes numb. So you need to be put on an antiviral rather than an antibiotic to get rid of the virus, and you're also given a steroid like prednisone to get things moving again. That's kind of where I'm at right now, and it's kind of scary because the recovery period can be anywhere between 2 weeks to 6 months, and in rare cases, not super rare, it's permanent. That's quite a barrel of a gun to look down. You could be like in your 60s or 70s, have a stroke, and then you lose, you know, feeling in your right side, your limbs and whatnot. I can still use all my limbs, so it's not that bad. But it is kind of scary to think that I could spend the rest of my life looking like the villain in the first Men in Black, the cockroach guy, you know, with sugar and water. Speaking of. So that's one dose of suffering I got. To add on top of that, I have, I guess what the modern vernacular is an invisible illness. In Thanksgiving of 2020, I contracted COVID, most likely through work, and I lost my sense of smell, and that's called anosmia, and I had that for 7 months, from November to June of 2021, and when my smell came back, it was wrong, and it was funky, and everything smells off. A lot of things smell like a gas leak, or it smells like a dead body. That's called parosmia. Parosmia is its own kind of special hell, but the best way that I can put it is that anosmia is as if you're going through life colorblind and everything is black and white. Parosmia is as if you're moving through the world and everything's kind of that, you know, early 2000s like weird filter where things are negative or things are super like uber colorful and stuff like that. It's very strange. It's quite an experience. Like I said, I have to start with the personal and then move out. So the reason why I bring this up is because, you know, so far in my life, those are like a handful of like the sufferings that I have been given. And a suffering could come in the form of like the loss of a loved one, or it could come in the form of a debilitating disease, or it could become like, it could be the loss of a limb. It could be a financial burden, something that makes your day-to-day life, hour-to-hour life, minute-to-minute life miserable and difficult to even get through. Like I said, the Bell's palsy, I'm most likely to recover from. You want to see something freaky? This is me trying to close my eyes. Ready? I have to sleep with a piece of tape over my eye to keep it moist. And then, this is kind of cool, a little eye patch for when I'm walking the dog outside or something and it's really windy. My wife says I look like a pirate, and I think I look like Jahudun from Dynasty Warriors, if anyone's ever played that. You know, there's no real reason to sugarcoat this. I'm an adult, and hopefully most of the people watching my material are adults. This sucks, and it could be permanent. With parosmia, I mean, there are some people who make a recovery after like 6 months, after a year, after 2 years. I'm coming up on 5 years without my nose, without a healthy relationship between my nose and the world. You do hear a lot of discouraging words from ENTs. They'll look you in the eye and they'll say, yeah, if your smell didn't come back in a year, it's permanent, like you're done. I've seen hundreds of people in my support group make a full recovery after 2 years, 3 years. There's only a few people in there, I'm one of them, that have lasted more than 4 years of this parosmia. So there is hope, but it could be permanent. That means, 34. What's the average age for a man these days? Somewhere between like 74 and 80, something like that. If the average lifespan of a man in the United States is like between 74 and 80 years old, that means that I could be spending the larger part of my life, a good 40 years, with a fucked up face and a nose that tells me everything around me smells rotten and should be avoided. So here's the big question that I want to try and answer. What do? Think of me not as a master's degree holding educated man, but instead your somewhat cool older cousin who went to community college and spent a lot of time at the library and smoked a bunch of weed and did some other hallucinogens. I can kind of tell you what it means. It's not going to be perfect, but hopefully you'll be understanding and forgive me in my shortcomings. And if I'm not giving you sufficient information, there's plenty of it to find out there. Existentialism is a school of thought that dictates that there is some sort of purpose and meaning in life, that this wasn't an accident, that perhaps a higher being on the metaphysical plane has put us here for a reason, and the things that are happening to us are happening for a reason. A Nietzschean way of looking at it is that if you find something in your day-to-day life that makes it worth getting out of bed in spite of the physical pain that you have, in spite of the loneliness that you're experiencing, whatever your healthy dose of suffering might be, that's the meaning in your life. Whatever makes it worthwhile. You can get caught in the weeds in that because maybe going out and committing crimes or hurting people is what gives you joy, and that's not to be encouraged in any way, obviously. But there's a school of thought that speaks to me in particular, and that's logotherapy by a psychiatrist named Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl was a man who survived the Holocaust, and he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, which is one of the more popular books of all time in Western literature. I was on a podcast years ago and regaled a tale, the passage that spoke the most to me in Man's Search for Meaning, and I'll show that clip.
So this old man whose wife died comes in very depressed, and Frankl asks him, if you had died and your wife was alive, do you think she would be as sad as you are? And he said, yeah, I think she would be, because we both loved each other very much. And he said, okay, so if your wife was alive, she would be suffering every single day, heartbroken and missing you and unable to eat and unable to sleep, just like you are now, right? He said, yeah. He said, okay, maybe you being alive saves her from that suffering, so she would never have to go through that. So your suffering, your going through all this horrible heartbreak and everything, relieves her of ever having to go through that. And the guy sat there in silence for about 30 seconds, and then he shook Frankl's hand and he said, that helps, and he left. And
he went and killed himself. I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself. I tried. I tried so hard, guys. I promise.
And Viktor Frankl left that detail out.
If you logically think about your suffering, think of a purpose that your suffering serves. in this case being that the suffering this man was enduring was put on him instead of his wife. Any man who loves his wife would much rather be in that position of terrible suffering rather than her. And so that would be truly a gift where it's like, okay, I'm the one that has to go through a terrible time and not her. Great. Put me through it. Fucking stab me, do whatever you gotta do, just so that she doesn't have to suffer. Now, maybe that's not how it is. Maybe it isn't as magical or as meaningful as that sounds, but you know, in a practical sense, it helped that guy move on. And you know, that's like, for me, maybe it's pragmatic, I don't know, but, or like utilitarian or whatever, but like, that's a result, you know, that's something where it's like, hey man, this guy was having a hell of a time, and then this psychiatrist helped him think through it and was like, hey, you're having a shitty time so that she didn't have to. And all of a sudden he becomes like a donkey that has purpose carrying his burden, rather than a donkey that's miserable and pissed off that he has to carry that burden. The various people online who'll throw out the slave is in love with his chains, you know, bullshit. Like, you just got to leave those people where they are. Existentialism, I think, can only work for a person who is ready to, or at least open-minded enough to accept or embrace the idea of something metaphysical beyond us that is working in tandem with us, or is at least trying to do something meaningful with us and our lives. And if that's completely shut off to you, well, there's another path that you can take.
Yes, we should carry our burden, accept the suffering that goes with it. But a danger lurks here, that of a subtle reversal. Don't fall in love, that's my position, with your suffering. Never presume that your suffering is in itself a proof of your authenticity. Renunciation of pleasure can easily turn into pleasure of renunciation itself.
Absurdism is the belief that there is no inherent meaning in this world, that it could all be an accident, and that there isn't some metaphysical being holding strings making sure everything works out hunky-dory. Sometimes shit just happens, man. And absurdism says, fuck it, we're here, we're queer, we're having fun, let's fucking party. Just have fun in spite of the lack of meaning. And maybe that could be the meaning in your life. This one's tougher because I have hesitancy toward it, but me personally, I much more identify with this school of thought as far as existentialism goes. Absurdism is a school of thought founded by Albert Camus, or Albert Camus. He wrote a few different books. I own 4 or 5 of them. I've only read 2. One of them is The Stranger, probably his most significant fictional work, and the other one that I've read is The Myth of Sisyphus. Quick review on The Stranger. It's interesting, it's visual, I don't like it. Which is word for word my wife's review of our wedding night. The Myth of Sisyphus, on the other hand, is actually a really good piece of work. And there's a lot that it delves into, and a lot of it I didn't retain, so I can't really spew it out at the top of my head. But in the Myth of Sisyphus, Sisyphus is cursed to roll a boulder all the way up a hill, and as soon as he gets the boulder to the top of the hill, it rolls back down to the bottom. And he is condemned to go back down to the bottom of the mountain and roll it back up. And he's going to do that for eternity. Is this really happening? No. But it depends on what you mean by real. What do you mean by happening? What do you mean by boulder?
I like that boulder. That is a nice boulder.
But you know, something that we're experiencing in modern society that I think a lot of people can relate to is that every day you wake up, you go to a job, whether it's in a communist state or a capitalist state or a mix of the two, a hybrid, whatever. You go to a job and you slave away with pay, minimal pay, to help achieve the dreams of someone else. And I worked retail, I worked on a harvest field, I've worked in a factory. I know what it's like to get up before the sun rises, clock in, and spend all day doing something that doesn't inspire you to make a shitload of money for someone else, and then go home exhausted, too tired, and fed up, and pissed off to work on your own dreams. I know what that's like. And that, to me, is like a really good representation of the archetypal experience of pushing a boulder eternally up a hill. Rolls back down, push it back up again. The absurdist way of looking at it, which is summed up in Albert Camus' whose probably most infamous line is that we have to imagine Sisyphus as happy. When he spends all day pushing this boulder up the hill and he's covered in sweat and he can hardly breathe and the sun's beating down on him and his muscles are sore and he knows that he can't stop, for that brief moment when he gets to the top of the hill and he puts the boulder in place, for a brief moment, he's happy. Why? Maybe because he did a little bit of work and it got done. Maybe because he gets a little break from the hell. How do we relate this to day-to-day life? Well, I know it's not super optimal. I know it's not going to solve all your problems, but maybe a good way of looking at it is that when you're driving to work or when you're riding on the bus and you're listening to your music or you're listening to a podcast, or if you're just looking out the window at the landscape, that's a little bit of a break. Or maybe your coworkers, which is something that a lot of us appreciate and don't know it. The connection that you have with your coworkers and how you can be friends with each other and how you can kind of go out of your way to help them out. And if you do that with the right people, they'll do it for you. And then suddenly it becomes a good team dynamic and you guys can hang out after work. That's a little bit of a break from the eternal hell that you're in. Or let's say, ideally, you go home after work and you still have enough energy to do what you got to do. Back in the times of tribes people, they spend all day hunting and gathering food and cooking and stuff. And then at the end of the night, there's a big bonfire and everyone like picks grubs off each other and they socialize, or they play drums and they chant and dance around. And that's the fun, you know? And the farmers at night, they'd get out the fiddles and the guitars and all that shit. I know that I'm romanticizing and glorifying it, but I really think there's a beauty that some people don't appreciate in the 6 to 8 hours that you don't have to work every day. You do go to work 40 hours a week, 40 plus hours a week. You do go to work, but then you come home after those 8 hours and you got 8 hours to yourself, and then you got to sleep 8 hours. And yes, it's not a perfect 8-8-8. It's not a perfect 24, but you do have some hours to yourself. And what do you do during that time? Well, that's a good break. Absurdism. It's not a super hot take that I have, but I don't think that Albert Camus came up with something completely original when he came up with absurdism. There's a book in the Bible. Now, don't get the wrong idea here. I'm not a Bible thumper, but I am going to talk about something biblical. There's a handful of stories throughout the entire Bible that resonate with me, that I find interesting. And time again, the one that I keep returning to out of the entire Bible, because I'm not much of a religious person, is the book of Ecclesiastes. I really do think that this is the biblical take on an absurdist point of view. It gets a little complicated because theologians have speculated that King Solomon, the author of Ecclesiastes, was not the sole author of that book, because in the original language there were phrases and words that weren't in vernacular until at least 600 years after the time of Solomon. And in these verses, they offer a more positive spin to the inherent pessimistic tone of the original text. The end result, the one that I read in the New International Version, it's a book that kind of talks about life as it is and how it's meaningless. Life is a meaningless thing. Rich people become more rich and poor people get more poor. And bad things happen to good people and great things happen to evil people. And mountains crumble in time and kingdoms rise and fall. There's a time for war. There's a time for peace. Entire civilizations come and go like dust in the wind. And it's all completely meaningless. It's a meditation on that idea. Albert Camus, Ecclesiastes, this to me, in my opinion, is a really good academic source. But if you want a practical, everyday source, there is nothing better in this whole world, as far as we know it right now, than the entire library of Monty Python.
2 people, 3 people have just fallen past that window. Must be a board meeting. Oh yeah.
Monty Python even made a movie aptly named The Meaning of Life. This is a movie that walks through the stages of life, and they pair it up with various skits, some of them from Flying Circus, some of them written specifically for the movie. And then the movie ends on a really nice note that I think an absurdist would use as a piece of advice for the meaning of life and what it is.
Well, that's the end of the film. Now here's The Meaning of Life. Thank you, Brigitte. Well, it's nothing very special. Try and be nice to people, avoid eating fat, read a good book every now and then, get some walking in, and try and live together in peace and harmony with people of all creeds and nations.
You know, just some basic advice like try and eat well, try and exercise a little, be nice to people. I mean, it's not anything magical or metaphysical, looking for the deep meaning within life beyond us. I mean, it's just, you know, eat some fruit, go for a walk, be nice to your neighbor, and don't be such a dick. Whether it's existentialism or absurdism, it offers you different perspectives for the same result, which is, yes, life sucks for various reasons. For almost all of us, including the ones where we're convinced it doesn't suck, life sucks and it's going to. It's guaranteed. But you gotta find a way to get through it. Otherwise, you end up in a very dangerous place. Nihilism is not a way of life. Nihilism is a way of eventual death. And that's how it is. Some people say that you can live with nihilism. You can't.
Man, they were nihilists, man.
Huh?
They kept saying they believed in nothing.
Nihilists. Fuck me. I mean, say what you want about the tenets of National Socialism, dude. At least it's an ethos.
Yeah.
What nihilism is not a way of life. It's a stepping stone. It's a transitional period. It's not something that you can exist in for long if you take it seriously. Nihilism is the realization or the acceptance or being ensconced, enveloped in the idea that life is meaningless. If you stay in that mode for too long, to use the modern YouTube-friendly vernacular, you'll delete your saved game. The other option out of nihilism is stepping back into either existentialism, which is taking life very seriously and that there is a hidden meaning and you have to work toward it, or absurdism, which is, hey, shit sucks, but let's have fun, man. Let's be a little hedonistic. Let's have fun. There is a meme at best that goes around called positive nihilism. There's no such thing as positive nihilism, okay? That's just absurdism and you're calling it something else because you want to be edgy. You're an absurdist. Get over it. But that's not really all I want to talk about as far as experiencing suffering and coming to the conclusion that there's no purpose to life. I really want to get into the messy parts of this, and so let's talk about it. This is probably the most difficult part of the entire video that I'm trying to make for me to talk about, because I do have to be honest with myself, and you have to be careful about putting out too much information on the internet, because the internet allows for the darkest of people's shadows to shine forth and take the wheel, and people can be shitty. You know, I do have a tendency to kind of look on the negative side of things and to spiral out of control and to really feel down about myself. It's not a way of life that I would recommend to anyone that I love. Trait neuroticism is one of the big five, and it's your tendency for negative emotion. When something happens like a flat tire, usually someone who is low in trait neuroticism is like, oh shit, and you know, kind of looks in the trunk for a spare, and if the spare doesn't have air, they kind of look at their insurance and they see what plan they got. Oh, well, I guess I could call someone, and then they call someone, and the person can't get out there for an hour, and well, I guess I'll just say, well, at least the car still works, you know, listen to some music, and then, you know, they call their mom or they call their friend, and this, yeah, fucking sitting on the side of the road with a flat tire. Huh. That exact same situation happens to someone who is high in trait neuroticism. I mean, they are on the edge of a meltdown, or they are deep within a meltdown throughout the entire thing. Their tire goes flat and they start swearing, God damn it, what the hell is going on? They pull to the side of the road, they look at the flat, oh my God, I got a flat tire, what am I gonna do? And then they open up the trunk, the spare tire is flat, and it's like, Jesus, of course, you know, of course it's flat. So then they look on their insurance and they find the number, and it's like, hey, I have a flat tire, can any of you help me? Yeah, we can't get out there for an hour. Okay, and then they hang up and it's like, God, you stupid son of a, and they just like, that's someone who's high in trait neuroticism, and that's most of the time in my life, that's me. But it is really tough for people who are high in trait neuroticism to be dealt a hand of suffering and say, hey, you got to deal with this indefinitely. You got cancer, and it could last 6 months or it could last 5 years. It could end your life. It's tough for someone who is high in trait neuroticism to not begin to lose motivation to do anything in life once that happens. You know, and I got to walk around looking like Sylvester Stallone, and, you know, I got to admit, I am afraid that this is permanent.
I'm afraid! All right?
Don't you worry about it, Chief. It won't be permanent.
I've struggled with religious belief, and there is a part of me that truly believes that there is something beyond us that we don't understand, that religions, old and new, are all trying to describe, and sometimes we're hitting the mark, and sometimes we're completely missing it, and sometimes we're getting too stuck in our humanity, and we're projecting onto the world around us, and sometimes we are hitting that magical, metaphysical thing. And because I believe in stuff like that, sometimes I get into a mood where it's like, okay, well, something on a metaphysical level is fucking with me, you know? I can't remember what my wife smells like. You know, you think to yourself that the universe, karma, the cosmos, God, whatever it is that you want to call it, is deliberately fucking with you and making your life worse. Perhaps to make an example of you, perhaps to punish you for something that you've done. Maybe God was bored and just made a bet with the devil, like in the book of Job, which is picked apart by atheists and agnostics, rightfully so, I believe. Carl Jung is probably my favorite thinker of our time. I've been reading him since maybe 2009, 2010, something like that, my first year of college. And one of his most infamous, controversial works is called Answer to Job, which is a little over 100 pages of his commentary on that particular story. There's a few different controversial claims that he makes. One of them is his ongoing criticism of Christianity, and that it is one-sided with God. It claims to be a monotheistic religion that worships only one God, which they dictate has complete control over the entire universe as we know it. And yet, at the same time, there's a character in the Bible represented by a few different characters: Satan, Beelzebub, the serpent, the devil, the enemy. Bill Hicks, one of my favorite comedians, offered a really good question to this dilemma. I think it's a fair criticism on Jung's part to call into question the one-sidedness of God, that is God really all good? In the preface to Answer to Job, he repeats Pope Clement I of Rome. Clement of Rome taught that God rules the world with a right and left hand, the right being Christ, the left Satan. Clement's view is clearly monotheistic, as it unites the opposites in one God. If you believe in one God, then perhaps the existence of evil is not in some other deity like Satan or the devil, but it is in the one true God. And that perhaps God himself has a shadow. God himself is not whole. God himself is whole only with that darkness that we project onto Satan. The evils that happen in this world, the suffering that happens in the world around us, I personally do not think it's right to put all the bad things at the feet of the devil and all the good things at the feet of God, because it calls into question his omnipotency. Is he truly all-powerful? Then explain Jacob Wetterling. Explain his family and the suffering that they had to go through. You know, this kid is kidnapped in the 1980s, causes an absolute, rightfully so, panic across the entire nation that our kids are no longer safe unsupervised. And for over 30 years, that family lived in absolute anxiety and fear and confusion and mystery as to what happened to their son. And then by sheer accident, this guy confessed to what actually happened to Jacob Wetterling.
Last week, the suspect led police to the boy's remains, and in a controversial plea agreement, in return for confessing, he will not face murder charges.
What happened to Jacob Wetterling, I'm going to attempt to make this YouTube friendly. It probably won't go well. He was kidnapped, he was played with, and then when the man who kidnapped him feared that things would get out of hand, he brought Jacob Wetterling out into the middle of a cold field, and as he asked to see his mom and to go home, the man took a gun and did what guns do best, straight through the back of Jacob Wetterling's head, and then buried him in the field. Where was God? This is a real question that needs to be asked. I don't think it's a game over question, but I really do think that Christians, or just people in general, if they want to take on the belief of religion or a monotheistic God, you either have to discard the idea that God's will is the will that happens everywhere, and that maybe the devil has a will of his own, and that there is a battle between God and the devil, and there is a chance that the devil could win, or you completely dismiss that idea, but then you have to embrace the idea that God is evil as well as good, and that nothing evil happens outside of God's will, and that all the evil that does happen in the world is because God says it must happen. Then the responsibility is on us to find out why the hell it happened in the first place. It's a tough question, and I haven't found a satisfactory answer from a Christian because I think they are very much unwilling to let go of the idea that God is the moral standard. I personally work a little bit better looking at God as amoral, and that he does rule the world with Jesus in his right and Satan in his left. You know, maybe the way that I truly look at it is that we are a creation of his, but he doesn't know exactly what to do or how to handle us. Like, scientists, as far as we know, can, you know, take a Rodak plate and put mold spores in it and grow a colony, but can you order that colony around? Can you really manipulate that colony exactly, precisely as you mean to? We can't, but we can certainly create them. Maybe we have that same relationship with God. Maybe the earth is just in one of the many, many cells, and we're just in the bloodstream, which is the universe as we know it, flowing through the ultimate being, which is God, which, just like us with our own cells, don't even have a relationship with them other than accidentally symbiotic. I mean, I can't tell my cells to do what I want them to do. They're doing their own thing on their own volition. I mean, our cells work on an instinctual level that we have no control over. We have a slight understanding of how to work in tandem with them, but I can't tell my nerves in my head to start working again. I can't tell my eyelid to close. I can't sit there like Beatrix in the back of the pussy wagon telling my fucking big toe to wiggle and just will myself to walk after being in a coma for years. That only happens in a fictional world. One of Jung's deeper thoughts was that we are all living a myth, and sometimes in the worst of my suffering, I do have a mood that I spiral into, which is basically, well, maybe I'm living the myth of Job. Maybe I am the target of some cosmic being. Maybe I am the butt of a cosmic joke, and I don't get the punchline. For all you Slipknot fans out there. But I have to say that that's not a good place to stay for long. I've tried my best to talk about different ways of looking at suffering in life and where it comes from. So let's get back into a little bit more of a practicality of it all. I think it's sage advice to a degree to not look for some sort of parasocial connection between you and your audience if you're a content creator. I want to make a brief exception for that rule just in this video right now and talk to you on a personal level. One of the hardest things that I've had to go through that wasn't physical, that was heartbreak and like emotional hurt, was the loss of my husky. I really liked that dog and we had a good connection, and he and I understood each other, and we spent a lot of time with each other in my bachelor pad. If I talk about him too much, I will start crying, so I'm going to try and keep it short. His name was Orion, and I got a tattoo. I don't know if I got it for him. Something that my brother told me that actually really helped me kind of get through the mourning period, which was, well over 2 years long, was that the amount of grief that you feel over the loss of a loved one is always to the same degree of love that you felt for them when they were alive. So if you're really going through some pain, that means that you had a really good time with them and you have really good memories with them. It's like you build up debt, which is, bought through love and memories. And then all of a sudden you're hit with that realization that life just loves to remind you of every once in a while that nothing here is permanent. Everything fades in time. So maybe it's best to just enjoy it while it is that fleeting moment, because maybe those moments will never return. We are alive and we get to experience many different things while alive on this planet. And I understand that I'm speaking from the point of view of a person who's led a relatively comfortable life. We get to see sunsets. We get to have wonderful conversations with people that we love. We get to see movies that move us, that shake us. We get to eat delicious food. We get to listen to each other's ideas. It's an incredible experience. And most of us, and some of us, the luckier ones, get to spend time, hopefully most of the time that we're alive, with someone that we intimately love and cherish, which is truly a connection that you don't get with anyone else in your life. It's quite a ride that we're on.
The world is like a ride at an amusement park, and when you choose to go on it, you think it's real, because that's how powerful our minds are. And the ride goes up and down and round and round. It has thrills and chills, and it's very brightly colored, and it's very loud, and it's fun for a while. Some people have been on the ride for a long time, and they begin to question, is this real, or is this just a ride? And other people have remembered, and they come back to us, and they say, hey, don't worry, don't be afraid, ever, because this is just a ride. And we kill those people. Shut him up. We have a lot invested in this ride. Shut him up.
The cost of the ticket to ride this ride of life is suffering. Eventually, you're going to lose someone that you love. Eventually, you're going to get a debilitating disease. Eventually, you're going to throw out your back and not be able to walk straight for a while. Eventually, the IRS is going to bend you over and have their way with you. Eventually! So what do you do in the face of that suffering? I think it's better to start with what you don't do. What you don't do is wear it on your sleeve and talk about it in a negative light endlessly. Just speaking about parosmia. In my support group, you'd be amazed how many people I came across who would not stop talking about how miserable they were around their friends and family, and then were shocked when they stopped getting invited to go out to dinner with these people. In a very strange way, where, maybe exploiting my standpoint epistemology here, it's really a lack of empathy for the people around you to bring the vibe down at a get-together at a bar or at a restaurant to talk about the misery that you're going through. Yes, you are going through a tough time, and yes, it does suck, but you have to see it from the other people's point of view, that when you talk about this problem, it's like a fire that you're feeding and bringing it to light. Now, if a friend is concerned about you and calls you out to a coffee date to talk about the problem, unload, absolutely. But if people are just getting together for a drink and you want to make the entire conversation about you and how miserable you are, you don't get to be shocked when they stop inviting you out. You're miserable company. Jordan Peterson, who I have conflicted feelings about, talks about his daughter, Michaela, growing up with a debilitating autoimmune disorder which caused her arthritis weakness in many of her joints, so much so that she was in a wheelchair.
My daughter had a lot of illnesses when she was adolescent. They were very serious, and it was very difficult to figure out what to do about that because we couldn't exactly apply normative rules. We always had to figure out if she was communicating her symptoms to us, how seriously to take those. And the answer was the least amount of serious possible. It's something like that, because we needed to know, and she needed to know, what she could do in spite of the fact that she had problems. And one of the things I really tried to instill in her, and I think it worked, is that you don't ever want to use your illness as an excuse for not doing anything. Not consciously. You know, sometimes you might not know, I'm not feeling well, what can I do? Well, you don't know, right? Because sometimes when you're not feeling well, you can do more than you think, and sometimes you can do less than you think. It's not like it's obvious, but sometimes it's obvious, you know, this little temptation flits through your mind and you think, well, I don't really want to do what I'm doing today and I'm not feeling very well, so I don't have to do it. You do that 100 times, then you don't know how sick you are anymore.
If you don't do the things you need to do, if you don't go out and face the difficulties of life, then this debilitating disease controls you. You don't control it. So my attitude with parosmia, when I was watching these other people in my support group lose 70 pounds because they weren't eating at all and become lonely and isolated because they were miserable company and they didn't want to go out to restaurants where everything smelled bad, and they didn't want to spend time with anyone because all they could ever do is just talk about how miserable they were. So they isolated themselves, they lost weight, they lost energy, and in the worst cases, they self-deleted. I was faced with a choice. I could be like that or I could not be like that. And it took a little bit of effort, but I conditioned myself in a way that I can live my life on a day-to-day basis with my wife, with our friends, with our family, and I could go out to restaurants and I could go to bars, I could go to dinners, I can eat whatever's put in front of me pretty much and not complain about it. And no one else has to be brought down as a result of it. And now I've got this Bell's palsy that I'm dealing with. And you know, I feel like Tom Cruise in Vanilla Sky. I kind of feel bad for my wife. I highly doubt that I'm pleasurable company to share dinner with. You know, just imagine looking across the dinner table at this mouth chewing on stuff. So what should I do? Should I hide? Should I stay at home? Should I not go out and do things? You can hide from the world, or you can go out and embrace it. So I go out into the world and I kind of look like this, and maybe I'm going to go out to a restaurant with someone and it looks kind of weird to them, or maybe I'm having a conversation with them and laughing about it. Maybe it sets them off a little, puts them a little like in an uncomfortable position. Well, as long as I don't talk about the disease, it's their responsibility to get over it. And if I can live my day-to-day life, they can get over it. What to do? What to do? I know that there are some people who really think that laughing about your suffering is just a mask for insecurity, and maybe to a degree they're right, but I think I would fire back at them. So you want me to just cry about it all day? You really want me to feel sorry for myself all day? You really want me to bring focus on it as much as I can? You really want me to like bring it to the edge of every conversation and inject it in when no one's asking for it? Or maybe I can just make a quick laugh about it and wait to deal with it in a more appropriate time. You can find some meaning in your suffering if you think about it, and you can try and laugh about it, and you can try and move on from it. I would suggest that if you are feeling very heavy about it, that you need to embrace those emotions. There were very tough times that I had with parosmia where I was kind of on the edge of not wanting to be alive anymore, and I told my wife about that out loud, and she comforted me. It usually happens about once or twice a year, where it kind of builds and builds and builds, and you know, in spite of my individual misery that I just kind of deal with on my own terms, eventually it gets control of me, and I do have to take it on. And I do have to face it. And you end up in a fetal position in the bathroom crying about being alive and how much it sucks. You shouldn't deny your emotions, but you shouldn't let them control you. Try and find a middle ground between that. You shouldn't just laugh at all your suffering and not deal with it, but you shouldn't spend all day crying about it. And at some point you got to find something else to either distract yourself or to actually find some real purpose and some real meaning. Like, yes, this is worth getting out of bed for. This is worth being alive for. I got a tattoo here. It says accept, transcend, and reduce. Accept your suffering, transcend your suffering, and if possible, try and reduce the suffering in those around you, which is actually a Jordan Petersonism.
Which isn't my idea. It's not my idea. It's an old idea. It's far older than Christianity. It's old. It's the oldest story of mankind. Get yourself together. Transcend your suffering. See if you can be some kind of hero. Make the suffering in the world less.
Every morning I wake up and my alarm goes off and it says, push that boulder, King. You know, it's just like a fun little thing to say to yourself, like, yeah, I'm going to spend the majority of my day making a lot of money for people who don't care about me. But once that boulder is at the top of the hill, I get that brief little break where I get to go home and I get to be in my space, and I have my guitars, my drums, my music to listen to. I have video games. I'm very lucky and fortunate to have my wife and a dog with whom I can spend time, but I also have friends that I can call. I have online friends that I can Discord with if I really wanted to. And there are some people who are not that fortunate to have those kind of friends and those kind of things, but you can still have something to distract yourself. This is just what works for me. Like I said, I'm not a devout Christian. I'm not someone who lives his life by the Bible. I have many different religious books. Many of them have good pieces of advice and inspirational passages. And so I'll finish this video with one of my favorite passages from Ecclesiastes, which really speaks to me. Live joyfully with the wife whom you love all the days of your vain life, which he has given you under the sun. All your days of vanity, for that is your portion in life, and in the labor which you perform under the sun. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might. For there is no work, or device, or knowledge, or wisdom in the grave where you are going. I hope this helped. Life is very tough, but you're tougher than you think. You're a direct descendant of so many strong humans who went out against the horrors of life, faced them, and survived. That blood runs in your veins. Do something with it. Don't be afraid.